The air was heavy with smoke, the smell of rust and sweat mixing together. Torches burned on the walls, throwing red light over rows of cages. Inside the cages, frightened eyes followed every sound. Chains rattled each time someone moved, and cruel laughter filled the market. Tall alien guards walked around, carrying spears with sharp hooks at the end. They pushed the weak ones closer to the front, showing them like animals to be sold. In the middle of this market sat a girl, her hands tied with iron cuffs, her ankles locked with heavy chains. Her skin glowed faintly in the firelight, and her long hair was dirty, covering her face. She had not eaten in days, and her lips were dry. She had stopped screaming long ago, because no one cared. Every time she cried for help, the crowd only laughed louder. She kept her eyes down, but inside, her heart was breaking. The buyers gathered in front of her cage. They whispered, argued, and pointed their fingers at her. They spoke about her bloodline, her body, her worth in their dark trade. One of them said she was perfect for the ritual. Another said she would produce strong offspring. Their words made her feel sick, but she had no power to fight. When she tried to pull away, the chains cut into her skin. The guard struck the bars with his spear, and the sound echoed like thunder, forcing her to stay silent. The crowd grew restless. The ritual was about to begin. At the far end of the hall, a stone platform was prepared. On it, strange markings glowed with green fire. Around the platform, priests in black robes chanted in a language full of sharp and broken sounds. The sound crawled into the girl's bones. She could not understand the words, but she knew what they meant. The ritual would take her will, her freedom, and her future. The chains on her wrists felt heavier with every passing second. The guards dragged her out of the cage. She stumbled, her knees hitting the ground, but they pulled her up roughly. The crowd cheered. The drums began to beat, slow at first, then faster, like a heart racing before death. The girl's breath shook in her chest. She tried to resist, but her legs gave way. The guards lifted her by the arms, carrying her toward the platform. She looked around desperately, but every face in the crowd was full of hunger, cruelty, and excitement. No one would help her. For a moment, she closed her eyes. She wished for death before the ritual could begin. She wished for silence instead of screams. Her body trembled, and her heart screamed inside her chest. The chanting grew louder, the drums hit harder. She was laid on the cold stone platform, her chains locked to the edges. The green fire glowed brighter, wrapping her body in strange light. The priests raised their hands, their claws covered with black paint. The crowd leaned forward, waiting to see her life stripped away. Her tears slid down her face, disappearing into the cracks of the stone. She wanted to fight, but she had nothing left. Her voice barely escaped her lips when she whispered, "Please, someone." The drums stopped suddenly, and silence filled the hall. The priests raised their knives, ready to cut the first mark into her skin. Then, a sound broke the silence. Footsteps, slow, steady, and clear against the stone floor. Every head turned toward the entrance of the market. From the shadows of the doorway, a figure stepped inside. The firelight caught his face, different from the rest. Not scaled, not horned, not monstrous. A human. Gasps and laughter spread through the crowd. The guards looked at one another, confused. What was a human doing here? Humans were weak, soft, and useless in their eyes. But this one walked forward without fear. His clothes were torn, his boots covered in dust, but his eyes burned like fire. He looked at the chained girl, then at the crowd, and his jaw tightened. One of the guards shouted at him to leave. Another raised his spear. But the human did not stop. He walked straight into the circle of green fire, ignoring the heat, ignoring the stares. His voice was calm, but sharp enough to cut through the noise. "She is not yours." The market froze. For a moment, no one moved. The priests lowered their knives, surprised by his courage. The alien leaders burst into laughter. Their teeth shone in the firelight, their voices mocking. "A human? Here? Do you plan to fight us all? You will die before you reach her." But the human did not look at them. His eyes stayed on the girl. She stared back, her chest rising and falling, unable to believe what she was seeing. In a world where everyone had turned away from her, someone had finally stepped forward. For the first time, hope stirred in her heart. The guards circled him now, spears pointed, ready to strike. The crowd shouted for blood, eager to see him fall. But the human did not flinch. He stood between the girl and the monsters, his shadow stretching across the stone floor. The silence that followed was heavy, like the air before a storm. The priests hissed, the guards growled, and the crowd screamed for violence. The knives rose again, the spears aimed for his chest, but the human clenched his fists, and his voice rose louder than the drums, louder than the chanting, louder than the whole market. "If you want her, you will have to go through me." The guards stepped closer, their spears shining in the torchlight. The human stood still, his fists clenched, his eyes burning with anger. The crowd laughed louder, the sound echoing against the stone walls. They thought he was a fool. They thought he would beg for mercy after the first strike. But he did not move. He faced them like a mountain standing against the wind. One of the guards shouted in a deep voice, calling him weak, calling him soft. "You are nothing but flesh and bone. Humans break too easily." The crowd cheered at those words, enjoying the humiliation. The human did not reply. Instead, he slowly stepped forward, his boots echoing on the floor. The noise of his steps cut through their laughter. His calmness made them uneasy. The alien girl lay chained on the platform, her eyes wide. She could not believe what she was seeing. Every part of her wanted to warn him, to tell him to run before they killed him. But her voice caught in her throat. Something about him, his confidence, his fire, kept her silent. Deep inside, a strange feeling of hope started to grow, though she had no reason to believe he could survive. The priests sneered, raising their black-stained claws. One of them said in a cruel voice, "You think you can stop the ritual? You will be the first sacrifice, human." They gestured for the guards to attack. A massive alien guard, bigger than the rest, stepped forward. His body was covered in thick armor-like scales, his arms long and strong. He raised his spear and lunged at the human, trying to pierce his chest. The crowd screamed with excitement, expecting blood to spill. But in that very moment, the human twisted to the side with lightning speed. The spear missed, hitting only the stone floor with a loud crack. Before the guard could pull his weapon back, the human's fist shot forward. It struck the alien's throat. The giant staggered, his eyes wide, clutching his neck. The crowd gasped in shock. No one had expected a fragile-looking human to hurt a scaled warrior. The guard coughed, dropped his spear, and fell to the ground. The laughter in the hall died instantly. The human bent down, grabbed the fallen spear, and spun it in his hands, like he had trained with such weapons his whole life. The torchlight glinted off the blade as he raised it toward the others. His voice was steady, full of defiance. "She is not yours, and I will cut down anyone who tries to touch her again." The market fell silent, except for the hiss of fire. The aliens stared at him, unsure whether to laugh or feel fear. Then another guard roared, charging forward with a heavy axe. The human blocked the strike with the spear, sparks flying as metal hit metal. The sound rang through the hall. The human pushed back, kicking the guard's knee. The alien cried out and collapsed, his axe slipping from his hands. The human pressed the spear against his throat, forcing him to stay down. The alien girl's heart pounded. She could not take her eyes off the fight. Every move the human made was filled with determination, as if he carried not just his own strength, but something greater. It was not brute power. It was skill, speed, and will. He moved like a man who had nothing left to lose. The crowd shouted in anger now. They no longer laughed. Their pride was burning. How could a human humiliate their warriors? The priests hissed like snakes, chanting louder to fill the air with power. But the human's presence cut through their noise. He stood tall with the spear, pointing it at the ring of guards. "Come then," he said, his voice echoing against the stone walls. "Come and see how weak humans really are." 3 guards rushed at once, their weapons raised. The human leapt back, dodging one strike, then spun and slammed the spear into the second guard's stomach. The alien bent forward, coughing blood. The third swung wildly, but the human ducked low and swept the spear across the ground, knocking his legs out from under him. The crowd roared in frustration. Their champions fell too easily before this single man. But the fight was far from over. The biggest of all the guards, the commander of the market, stepped forward. His body was twice the size of a human, his eyes glowing red with fury. His armor was thick and scars covered his face. The other guards stepped back, giving him space. The crowd went silent, waiting for the clash. The commander pointed his heavy blade at the human and growled, "You will die here, human. No one leaves this place alive. The human gripped the spear tighter. His chest rose and fell, but his eyes never looked away from the girl. She watched him with trembling lips, unable to breathe. She realized something in that moment. He was not fighting just to survive. He was fighting for her. The commander roared and charged forward like a beast. The ground shook with his steps. The human waited, his body tense, his mind sharp. When the blade came down, he rolled aside, the weapon smashing into the stone platform where the girl was chained. Sparks flew, dust filled the air. The girl screamed, her chains rattling. The human stood again, the spear ready, and struck at the commander's side. The blade slid between his scales, drawing dark blood. The commander roared louder, swinging again with rage. The human barely escaped the strike, the air hissing where the blade cut. The fight raged back and forth, every strike shaking the hall. The crowd screamed in anger, fear, and shock. The alien girl's eyes filled with tears, not of despair, but of something new, belief. For the first time, she believed escape was possible. The commander's blade struck again, missing by inches. The human spear flashed like lightning, stabbing into the giant's arm. The roar shook the walls. The commander swung wildly, trying to crush him with raw strength. But the human did not back away. He stood firm, his spear pointed straight at the monster. The fight was not yet decided, but one thing was clear to everyone in that cursed market. This human was no ordinary man. The hall was filled with dust and smoke after the clash. The commander's roar still echoed in the stone walls, but the human did not wait for the fight to continue. He saw the chains around the alien girl's wrists glowing in the firelight, and with one sharp strike of the stolen spear, he broke them apart. The iron shattered and fell to the ground with a heavy clang. The girl gasped as the weight lifted from her arms for the first time in weeks. Her skin burned where the cuffs had bitten into her, but freedom made her heart beat faster than pain. The priests screamed in fury, their chants turning into shrieks. The crowd erupted, some shouting for blood, others rushing forward in chaos. The human grabbed the girl's hand and pulled her up. Her legs trembled. She could barely stand. She stumbled as he dragged her across the stone floor. He didn't let go. "Move," he shouted, his voice sharp and commanding. Behind them, the guards roared, chasing after them with spears and axes. The human pulled her through the maze of cages. Prisoners inside reached out with desperate hands, begging for help, but he could not stop. Every second mattered. Torches fell as they ran, smoke filled the passages, and the sound of heavy boots shook the floor behind them. The girl's breath came in short gasps. Her body was weak, her muscles stiff from chains, but the human's grip kept her going. She wanted to collapse, but his strength gave her no choice. He carried her weight when she faltered, his arm around her waist, forcing her legs to move. "Don't stop," he growled, his eyes always ahead. The sound of alarms rose above the noise of the crowd. Strange horns blasted, their deep notes warning the whole market that slaves had escaped. Doors slammed open, more hunters rushing out, blocking the paths. The girl's heart sank when she saw their massive forms closing in, weapons ready. The human did not turn back. He darted into a narrow alley, the walls dripping with slime, shadows twisting in the torchlight. The girl's feet slipped, and she almost fell, but he held her steady. Behind them, the hunters roared, their steps thunderous. One spear flew past, striking the wall inches from her face. She let out a cry, and the human pulled her tighter against him, shielding her with his body as they ran. At the end of the alley, a gate stood locked with a heavy bar. The girl panicked. "We are trapped," she whispered. The hunters' footsteps grew closer, their snarls echoing like beasts ready to feed. But the human slammed his shoulder into the wooden bar. It cracked once, twice, then broke with a sharp snap. The gate burst open, and cold night air rushed in. For the first time, the girl saw the stars above. They stumbled into the open streets, filled with crooked buildings and strange lights. The market slaves rarely saw the city outside, and she felt both fear and awe. But there was no time to look. The hunters followed, spilling out of the gate like a flood. The human tightened his grip on her hand and pulled her into the maze of streets. Her lungs burned, her legs screamed with pain, but he did not slow down. He half carried her now, his arm wrapped firmly around her shoulders, dragging her forward with sheer will. She could hear his breath too, heavy but steady, like a man carrying more than his own life. The hunters split apart, trying to cut them off. Shouts rang from every corner, the clatter of weapons growing closer. The human darted into another narrow path, his eyes sharp, always searching for the next way out. His mind worked fast, every turn chosen with purpose. He knew they couldn't outrun the entire market forever, but he had to buy them time. The girl whispered weakly, "Why are you doing this? You don't even know me." Her voice shook with fear and confusion. The human didn't look at her, because no one deserves what they tried to do to you. His tone was harsh but full of fire, as if the thought alone filled him with rage. She stared at him in silence, her chest tightening with a strange new feeling. They passed through a ruined archway and into the lower tunnels beneath the city. The air was damp, the walls covered in moss, and the floor uneven with stones. The hunters' roars echoed behind them, closer with each step. One of them lunged from the shadows, swinging a blade, but the human reacted instantly. He shoved the girl behind him, caught the alien's arm, and drove the stolen spear through its chest. The alien dropped with a scream, blood spraying the tunnel walls. The girl trembled at the sight, but the human did not pause. He pulled her forward again, his hand strong around hers. They ran deeper into the tunnels, the darkness swallowing them. Only the faint glow of moss and the girl's own dimly glowing skin lit the path. Her legs gave out, and she collapsed to her knees, gasping for air. I can't go on," she whispered. Her body shook violently, her face pale. The hunter's shouts grew louder, echoing closer. The human crouched beside her, his eyes fierce. "Then I'll carry you." Without waiting for her answer, he lifted her in his arms. Her body felt weightless to him, though his own muscles strained. She clung to him, her cheek pressed against his chest, listening to his pounding heartbeat. It was steady, strong, unbroken. Each step he took was heavy, but he never slowed. His strength was not just in his body, but in his will. The tunnel twisted and opened into another chamber, lit by broken machinery and dripping pipes. Water splashed beneath his boots as he moved. Behind them, torches flared as the hunters poured into the tunnels, their growls echoing like wolves. The human shifted her weight, holding her tighter, and kept running. The girl looked up at him, her voice soft. "You should leave me. They only want me. You can escape if you let me go." His jaw tightened and his eyes glared forward. "No, I will not leave you." His words were final, heavy as stone. Tears welled in her eyes, not from fear this time, but from something deeper. She had been abandoned by everyone, her people, her captors, the galaxy itself. Yet this one man, a stranger, refused to let her go. She buried her face against him, gripping his torn shirt with weak hands. The sound of hunters grew louder, closer. The chase was not over. But for the first time since her capture, the girl no longer felt like prey. She was in the arms of someone who would fight the entire world before letting her fall. The tunnels grew colder as they went deeper, the sound of water dripping from the ceiling echoing in the silence. The human finally stopped running when he was sure the hunters had lost their trail. He pushed open a rusted metal door at the far end and led the girl inside. It was an abandoned chamber, half broken and covered in shadows, but it was quiet. The only light came from cracks in the ceiling where the moonlight slipped through. He lowered the girl gently onto the ground. Her legs trembled, her breath shaky. She leaned against the wall, her hands clutching her chest. The human knelt beside her, checking the chains still clinging to her ankles. He broke the last of them with a piece of stone, tossing the iron aside. For the first time in what felt like forever, her body was free. She rubbed her wrists, the skin raw and red. Her eyes shifted to him, uncertain. She had seen him fight like a storm, but now, in the silence, she saw the weight in his eyes. His shoulders rose and fell with exhaustion, yet his gaze never left the doorway. He was alert, ready for another attack, even though his body screamed for rest. She wondered what kind of man could walk into a pit of monsters just to save someone he did not know. Finally, her voice broke the silence. "Why? Why did you save me?" Her words were weak, almost a whisper. She hugged her knees, afraid of the answer. No one had ever done anything for her without asking for something in return. The human turned his head slowly, his jaw tight. "Because I know what it feels like," he said. His voice was low but heavy. "I know what it's like to be treated as less than nothing. My people were once chained too. We were used, beaten, laughed at, just like you." The girl's eyes widened. She had never heard of humans like that. To her people, humans were strange, outsiders, but not slaves. She frowned. And now? Are your people still chained? He shook his head, his eyes hardening. No, we fought back. We broke every chain, and we swore never to let it happen again. Not to us, not to anyone. The words struck her heart. She had grown up believing no one cared for the weak. She had thought the galaxy was built on cruelty and power alone. But here was a man who risked his life, not for riches, not for glory, but for a promise made long before. She studied his face, trying to see if he was lying. But there was only fire in his eyes, the fire of someone who had lived through suffering and refused to let it win. She lowered her gaze, her fingers brushing the scars on her wrists. I thought no one would come for me, she whispered. When they took me, I thought it was the end. Every day I prayed for death because death felt kinder. Her voice cracked and tears filled her eyes. But then you walked in. The human looked at her, his face softer now. He placed his hand lightly on her shoulder. She flinched at first, but then she felt the warmth in his touch. You're alive, he said firmly, and while I breathe, no one will chain you again. Her lips trembled, but a small spark lit inside her chest. Hope. Something she thought she would never feel again. She wanted to believe him, though fear still clung to her heart. She wiped her tears with her sleeve, staring at him with a mix of gratitude and doubt. The silence stretched between them, heavy but not uncomfortable. The girl finally asked, Why are you not afraid of them? They're stronger than you, bigger than you. They have armies, weapons, and power. And yet, you stood against them alone. The human leaned back against the wall, his eyes looking up at the cracks in the ceiling where the stars shone faintly. Because strength isn't just muscle, he said. They fight with fear. They win because people believe they cannot be beaten. But I don't believe that. I never have. He glanced at her, his voice hard. I've seen giants fall, I've seen empires crumble, and I know one truth. No chain is unbreakable. His words wrapped around her like a shield. She stared at him, her chest rising and falling quickly. For the first time since her capture, she felt like maybe, just maybe, she had a chance to live. A faint smile touched her lips, though her eyes still held sadness. You're strange, she said softly. Humans are strange. He gave a tired chuckle, shaking his head. Maybe, or maybe we just refuse to give up. The sound of distant footsteps echoed faintly in the tunnels again. The girl's smile vanished, her body tense. The hunters were still searching. Fear gripped her once more, but the human stood up, spear in hand, his eyes sharp. They won't find us here, not tonight, he said, his voice steady. She watched him move to the doorway, his back straight, his body ready to fight again, even though exhaustion weighed on him. A strange warmth spread in her chest. She had been seen as an object, a tool, a prisoner. But to him, she was someone worth protecting. Her voice shook as she whispered, I don't even know your name. He glanced back at her, the faintest smile on his lips. Names don't matter right now. Surviving does. Her heart tightened. She wanted to ask more, to know more about this strange, stubborn human, but her body was too weak. Her eyelids grew heavy, exhaustion pulling her down. As she drifted into sleep, the last thing she saw was him, standing guard at the doorway, a lone figure ready to fight the galaxy for her. And as darkness took her, one thought echoed in her mind. Perhaps she was no longer alone. The girl woke to the sound of voices echoing through the tunnels. Her heart jumped in her chest, and for a moment she forgot where she was. Then she saw the human, standing near the broken doorway with the spear in his hand, his back turned to her. His stance was tense, his head tilted slightly as if he could hear every sound in the dark. She pushed herself up, her body still weak, and whispered, They're coming? He didn't turn, but his voice was calm. Yes, they found our trail. The girl's breath shook. Fear crawled inside her chest. She knew the hunters would not stop. They would drag her back, chain her again, and this time the ritual would not be delayed. She hugged her knees, trembling. Then you should run. Leave me. If they catch you, they will kill you too. The human finally turned, his eyes steady, his voice sharp. I told you already, I will not leave you. Before she could answer, a loud roar thundered through the tunnels. Shadows moved on the walls as torches flared. Dozens of guards poured into the chamber, their eyes glowing in the firelight, their weapons raised. The ground shook under their boots. The girl froze, her throat dry, her hands gripping the stone floor. The human stepped forward, placing himself between her and the horde. He spun the spear in his hands, the tip catching the dim light. "Stay behind me," he said without looking back. The first guard charged, his axe raised high. The human met him with speed, thrusting the spear into his chest before the blade could fall. The alien collapsed with a cry, blood spraying the stones. Another rushed from the side, but the human twisted, yanking the spear free and sweeping it across the enemy's legs. The guard fell hard, and a quick strike ended him. The girl watched with wide eyes. The human was outnumbered, yet he moved with precision, every step sharp, every strike final. But there were too many. For every guard he dropped, two more came forward. The chamber filled with the clash of weapons, the sound of roars, and the hiss of steel against stone. One guard broke through, heading straight for the girl. She screamed, pressing against the wall, her body too weak to run. The human turned instantly. He hurled the spear with all his strength. The blade pierced the alien's back before he could reach her. The guard fell, dead at her feet. The human ran, grabbed the spear again, back, and stood tall, his chest heaving but his eyes still blazing. The hunters surrounded him now, circling like wolves. The commander of the market stepped forward, his massive frame filling the chamber. His scars glistened, his red eyes glowing with hate. He raised his heavy blade and pointed it at the human. "You have made a fool of us, human. You will die slowly for this." The girl shook her head, tears filling her eyes. "You can't fight him. He's too strong." The human didn't answer. His grip tightened on the spear, his jaw clenched. He charged before the commander could move, his body a blur of speed. The clash shook the chamber. The commander swung his blade down, but the human rolled aside, stabbing at his side. The spear pierced flesh, but not deep enough. The commander roared and backhanded him across the room. The human slammed into the wall with a grunt, the spear flying from his hand. Blood trickled from his mouth as he staggered to his feet. The girl cried out, "Stop! Please stop!" But no one listened. The commander strode toward him, each step heavy, his blade raised high. The human had no weapon now, only his fists. He wiped the blood from his lips, stood straight, and whispered to himself, "No chains! Not again!" The commander swung, the blade slicing the air. The human ducked, his hand snatching up a broken chain from the ground. With a sudden move, he wrapped it around the commander's arm, pulling with all his strength. The blade missed, crashing into the floor. Sparks lit the chamber. The human climbed onto the commander's back, wrapping the chain tighter, choking him. The massive alien thrashed, slamming him into the walls, but the human did not let go. His muscles screamed, his ribs ached, but he pulled harder. The commander roared in rage, stumbling, his face turning dark. With a final desperate cry, the human yanked the chain across his throat. There was a sharp crack. The commander fell to his knees, gasping, before collapsing face first onto the stone. The chamber fell silent. The crowd of guards froze, their eyes wide. None dared move. The human stood over the fallen giant, his chest heaving, his body bruised and bloodied. He held the broken chain in his hands, his eyes blazing with fire. He turned toward the rest, his voice echoing in the chamber. "Do you still think humans are weak?" No one answered. Fear spread among them. Slowly, one by one, the guards stepped back, their courage broken. The girl's heart pounded. She could hardly breathe. She stared at him, her tears falling freely, not from fear this time, but from awe. He was bleeding, wounded, yet he still stood tall. He had faced their strongest and survived. The human walked back to her, his steps unsteady but firm. He reached out his hand. She took it without hesitation. His grip was warm, steady, unshakable. She whispered, her voice trembling, "Why do you keep risking your life for me?" He looked at her, his face shadowed but his eyes burning bright. "Because your life matters more than theirs." The words struck deep into her soul. No one had ever spoken to her like that. No one had ever valued her beyond her bloodline, beyond her body. For the first time, she felt like more than a prize, more than a slave. The hunters slowly retreated, dragging their wounded with them. The chamber grew quiet again, the firelight flickering against the broken walls. The human leaned on the spear, his breath heavy, but he still stood guard, his eyes never leaving the shadows. The girl pressed her hand against her heart, her tears falling silently. She realized in that moment that she was no longer afraid of dying. She was afraid of losing him. The chamber was filled with the stench of blood and smoke. The human leaned heavily on the spear, his chest rising and falling with every painful breath. His clothes were torn, his arms covered in cuts, but his eyes were still fierce. The girl knelt beside him, her trembling hands trying to wipe the blood from his face. "You can't fight anymore," she whispered, her voice breaking. "They will kill you." He shook his head slowly. "It's not over. They will come again." His tone was steady, but his body was close to collapse. The girl wanted to tell him to stop, to hide, to run. But before she could speak, a sound rolled through the tunnels, a deep, furious roar. The walls shook, dust falling from the ceiling. From the darkness, new figures emerged. Not guards this time, but hunters, larger and stronger, their skin covered with thick scales, their eyes glowing like burning coals. Each carried weapons made of bone and steel, carved with cruel designs. They had been called for one purpose, to finish what the guards could not. The girl's blood turned cold. She clutched the human's arm, fear twisting inside her. "We can't fight them. They are deathbringers. No one survives against them." The human pushed her gently behind him, lifting the spear again. His voice was hoarse but unshaken. "Then we make them bleed anyway." The hunters spread out, circling them, their growls echoing like beasts in the wild. The leader, a massive creature with scars across his chest, stepped forward and snarled. "The girl belongs to us. Step aside, human, and we may let you crawl away." The human spat blood on the ground and raised the spear. "If you want her, you'll have to tear her from my dead hands." The hunters roared in anger and charged. The chamber exploded with chaos. The human fought with everything left in him, his spear flashing in the firelight. He ducked, rolled, and struck with speed, each move aimed to kill. One hunter fell with the spear through his heart. Another screamed as the blade cut his throat. The girl pressed herself against the wall, her heart pounding as she watched him fight against impossible odds. But for every hunter he killed, 2 more took their place. The human's strength was fading. His arms shook, his legs staggered. A heavy blow struck his side, knocking him to the ground. The spear clattered away. The hunters roared in victory, closing in for the final strike. The girl screamed. "No!" Her body moved before her mind. She ran to him, throwing herself in front of the hunters. Her voice cracked as she shouted, "You will not take him!" The hunters froze for a moment, surprised by her defiance. In that instant, something inside her awoke. A burning heat spread through her veins, a power she had never felt before. Her people had always spoken of a hidden gift buried deep in their blood, a force only awakened in the darkest hour. Now that hour had come. Her eyes glowed with blinding light, her skin shimmered with energy. The hunters stepped back, growling in confusion. The girl raised her hands, and a wave of force burst from her body. It slammed into the hunters, throwing them against the walls like ragdolls. The ground shook, dust and stone falling from above. The human stared at her in shock, his lips parting. He had seen her as fragile, weak, broken, but now she stood like a flame in the darkness, her body glowing with raw power. She turned her head toward him, her voice trembling but filled with strength. "I will not let them take you." The hunters roared again, enraged, but they were cautious now. They circled her, but she raised her arms once more, releasing another wave of energy. One by one, their bodies cracked under the force, their screams echoing in the chamber. The light in her eyes grew brighter with each strike, until the last of them fell silent, their lifeless forms sprawled across the stones. Silence fell. Only the sound of her ragged breathing filled the air. Slowly, the glow faded from her body, and she collapsed to her knees, her strength gone. The human crawled to her side, catching her before she hit the ground. He held her tightly, his arms wrapping around her shaking frame. "You saved me," he whispered, his voice full of disbelief and pride. Her eyes fluttered open, her lips trembling into a faint smile. "No, we saved each other." He held her close, feeling her heartbeat against his chest. His body ached, his blood still dripping from wounds, but he no longer felt weak. He looked around at the fallen hunters, their bodies proof of what they had survived together. He realized then that she was not just a girl he had rescued. She was more, stronger than even she had known. The girl buried her face against him, tears sliding down her cheeks. She had been treated like an object, a prisoner, a tool for breeding. But now, for the first time, she felt alive. She had chosen to fight, to protect, and her choice had turned the tide. The human stroked her hair gently, his voice low. They will come again, stronger, angrier, but we'll face them together. Her arms tightened around him, her voice weak but steady. Yes, together. In that dark chamber, surrounded by blood and broken chains, a bond had been forged, one of fire, pain, and unshakable will. The galaxy outside was still cruel, still dangerous, but now they had something greater than fear. They had each other. And as the torches flickered low, their shadows stretched across the walls, no longer alone, no longer broken. The night was silent after the storm of battle. Broken weapons and fallen bodies lay scattered across the floor. The girl sat against the wall, her body trembling from exhaustion, while the human kept his arm around her, his hand steady on her shoulder. His own body was covered in wounds, his breath heavy, yet his eyes still searched the shadows, ready for another attack. But none came. The hunters had been destroyed, and the rest had fled. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The girl's glowing power had faded, and now she looked like any other frightened prisoner. Her lips parted slowly, her voice weak but full of emotion. "Why did you not leave me when you had the chance?" The human turned his head to her, his jaw set, his eyes burning with quiet fire. "Because your life matters, because no one deserves chains, and because I could not live with myself if I walked away." Her chest tightened, her eyes filling with tears. No one had ever spoken to her like that. To everyone else, she had been a tool, a prize, a body to be used. But to him, she was simply a person worth saving. She touched her wrist where the scars of the chains still burned and whispered, "Then I will never forget you." The human slowly rose to his feet, though his body shook with pain. He extended his hand to her. She hesitated for a heartbeat, then placed her smaller hand into his. His grip was firm, pulling her up gently. Together, they walked out of the broken chamber and into the tunnels, leaving behind the ruins of the Market of Chains. The tunnels opened into a cliffside, where the cold night air rushed against their faces. Above them, the stars stretched wide, brighter than she had ever seen before. The girl stopped, staring at the endless sky. For so long she had thought she would die in darkness, chained and forgotten. Now, the stars looked like freedom itself. She whispered, "I thought I would never see them again." The human looked at the same sky, his face unreadable. "The galaxy is cruel," he said quietly, "but it can be beautiful too. You just have to fight for it." She turned her eyes to him, studying his scars, the blood on his face, the strength in his voice. "You fought for me," she said softly, "and now I don't want to be afraid anymore." He met her gaze, and for a moment the silence between them was louder than any words. Then, without looking away, he said, "You're free now. What you do with that freedom is yours to decide." Her lips trembled, and she nodded. "Then I choose to walk with you." They began their journey down the rocky path, away from the cursed place. Each step was heavy, but each step carried hope. Behind them, the market burned. Somewhere deep in the tunnels, flames spread from the torches and bodies, swallowing the place where so many had suffered. The air carried the smoke upward, as if the chains of the past were finally being erased. But danger was not gone. In the distance, horns echoed through the night. The masters of the market had not forgotten. More forces would come. The girl's body stiffened in fear, but the human's hand tightened around hers. His voice was calm, steady. "Let them come. We'll face them together." She drew strength from his words, her fear turning into something new, courage. She realized that survival was no longer about running or hiding. It was about standing, about fighting beside him. They reached a ridge overlooking the valley. Fires burned in the distance. Ships glowed faintly against the horizon. The girl leaned against the human, her body weak but her spirit alive. She whispered, "Where will we go now?" He looked out over the valley, his eyes hard with determination. "Anywhere they fear us, anywhere chains still exist, we'll break them all." Her heart pounded at his words. The thought of fighting against empires, armies, and kings seemed impossible. Yet when she looked at him, she believed it could be done. This single man had walked into the jaws of death for her and emerged alive. If he could do that, then maybe he could change the galaxy too. The wind howled across the ridge, carrying with it the smell of fire and the taste of freedom. The girl took a deep breath, closing her eyes. For the first time, the air did not feel heavy. It felt alive. She pressed her hand to her chest, feeling her heart beat strong. The human began walking again, and she followed. Their shadows stretched long behind them, two figures against the endless stars. He carried his spear, broken but still sharp, and she carried her scars, no longer marks of weakness but symbols of survival. After a long silence, she spoke again, her voice soft but clear. I was nothing to them, less than nothing. But to you, I was worth saving. Why? He glanced at her, his eyes steady, his voice quiet. Because I've seen what happens when no one stands up. I've buried too many who were left behind. I won't let it happen again. Her steps slowed as she absorbed his words. A tear rolled down her cheek, but it was not from sorrow. It was from something deeper. Gratitude, respect, and a bond she could not yet name. She reached for his hand once more, and he didn't pull away. Their fingers locked, firm and certain. As they disappeared into the horizon, the galaxy seemed to hold its breath. One girl who had been nothing, and one man who refused to let her chains define her. Together, they were more than survivors. They were the spark of something greater, something that would burn across the stars. The girl whispered softly, her words carried away by the wind. As long as I live, I will stand beside you. The human only nodded, his eyes fixed forward. And in the silence that followed, the stars above seemed to shine brighter, as if the universe itself had witnessed the birth of a new beginning.